Dispatch called me to the scene. Walking in the door, the power was still out. It was like something out of a horror film to me.
We noticed to the right an office area where there was a body laying. It was John Markle. He was laying against a wall. He was deceased, and there was blood on each side of the head. After we found his body, that's the moment where we had a concern that we had a homicide. Now, my concern was the safety of the family, knowing that there were a wife and possibly 2 children in the home. So we backed out and moved on through the home.
We go into a little girl's room. I remember first seeing the walls were pink. There was a record player there in the room, posters, stuffed animals and stuff. And then I look up, there's blood all over those pink walls.
This is very vivid to me. I find a young child in the bed, and I walk around to the other side of the bed, and there's a second child. We found her in the same bed next to her sister. 13-year-old Amy and 9-year-old Suzanne, both been shot to death.
In the master bedroom, we found 45-year-old Christine Markle sprawled across the bed with gunshot wounds. She was in her nightgown. To me, it looked like she had woke up, put her feet on the floor, went to sit up or stand up.
Or maybe she heard something and she was getting out of bed. She had what appeared to be gunshots to the face and the head. We radioed to communications or dispatch, letting them know at that time that we obviously had a homicide. So the detectives began their investigation.
They went through the house, room by room, taking anything that they believed could help them in the investigation. And they found dozens of letters, documents, and then I could see there was a briefcase sitting there with some note attached to it. The note said basically that I murdered my wife, Christine, my daughters, Amy and Suzanne. He signed it, John Markle. At first glance, this would seem like an open and shut murder-suicide from everything that you saw right there. But there were some things that seemed odd.
I remember vividly that there was a mask that was laying near John Markle's body, like an old man mask. There was blood on that mask.
The mask found at the scene, at first I wondered, why is that there? Because it was, not a ski mask, not even a hockey mask. It was a, Halloween mask. We found inside the briefcase, there was a birth certificate, passport, car title, but what really stood out was the cash that was found in there. Items that somebody might have in there if they were getting ready to disappear or try to leave the country or something like that. But one of the oddest things was the fact that John Markle was shot with 2 different guns at the same time in the head.
Found near his body was a Western-style .45, and a .45 is a very large caliber. And then also a .38 caliber revolver. I don't know the odds of someone being able to shoot themselves simultaneously with the gun on each side of the head. It seems to me like it'd be 1 in a million.
I was assigned to the Markle murders to investigate the financial aspects of it. At first glance, everything appeared to be an open and shut case because, the scene, the suicide note, but nobody had ever heard of this suicide with using 2 guns simultaneously.
I was directed to go out and do a neighborhood canvass. We knocked on doors and saw if anybody heard anything overnight.
On the night of the murders, there were reports that John left the house and he was followed by a white truck. And then a short while later, his family was dead.
We had to see if there was anybody else out there that may have been involved or had motivation to hurt the Markles.
And we learned John Markle was a vice president at Stevens Inc. He was supposedly a financial whiz.
He would work these incredibly long hours. He was raking in $3 million in trades. John Markle moved in a world where fortunes were made and lost overnight.
So we started looking into the Marcos' financial records. We then started to discover various red flags that popping up. The one thing that was out of the norm was that he was writing a number of checks every week to cash. This was to the tune of, $600 to $1,000 a week. With inflation today, that would be approximately $10,000 a month. So the fact that these checks were so consistent really raised my curiosity as to where this money was going.
That's when the toxicology reports came in.
They noticed something a little unusual in the reports. All of them had Elavil in their system.
Elavil is an antidepressant, and it can cause drowsiness. It was somehow introduced to their bloodstream in an apparent attempt to make them drowsy.
That's when they started looking back at John Markle's briefcase and the contents of what was in the briefcase.
We culled through all those documents. We then started to discover he was deeply in debt.
As detectives dug deeper, they found a secret account.
It led us to one date. And that's the date that everything unraveled for John Markle. And that was Friday the 13th. Markle was a top earner at the company, but it turns out he was actually involved in a big scheme where he was manipulating money, moving trades around, and covering his tracks while doing so.
Over $5 million had been embezzled out of the accounts over the years. His employer confronted him, and at that point, he admitted to his wrongdoing. On Friday the 13th, 1987, Markle was fired from his job.
It was the day that he lost everything.
We wanted to explore who may have benefited from the financial embezzlement. So we went out and subpoenaed bank records, interviewed a number of people that worked with him, trying to follow the path of the money. So as we started looking into where this money was going, we were able to trace going back to John Markle's own mother, Mercedes McCambridge, to her house in San Diego, as well as her accounts out there. I made contact with Mercedes. She was guarded in her response. She denied being involved. She said that she provided the money to invest in her granddaughter's education. And I could see that as she processed that thought, some sadness came over her. And what we learned was she didn't know anything about the embezzlement.
But there was never a clear and concise reason why he did this.
When detectives searched the home again and started taking any financial documents that could show what was going on in his life, they found dozens of letters and documents that John had written.
There was one letter that stood out. It was a 12-page letter addressed to his mother, Mercedes McCambridge.
Based on this letter that John wrote to his mother, his relationship with her was not very good.
In the letter that John Markle wrote to his mother, he said,
I was conceptualized to save a bad marriage. I was essentially raised by live-in maids and relatives. You were working.
He felt she was more, in tune to being in Hollywood and doing the actress movie star role than being his mother. He talks about the way that he tried to prove himself to her by getting a PhD, by getting this great paying job, by starting his own family and prospering, but did not feel that anything was ever good enough for his mother.
John blamed his mother for the problems he was facing. And he said, she's a demon. And in fact, she voiced the demon's voice in The Exorcist, the movie that changed her life.
As we dug deeper into John's letters, one story stood out regarding the car accident that he was involved in, where he almost died.
He was in ICU, had a significant head trauma, and she never once visited him.
In the letter, he wrote, "I'm released from the hospital. I kept calling you, and the phone was always busy. I called a cab, and I go to your apartment. My head is wrapped in bandages and gauze. I'd see you naked on the floor. Pills and bottles all over the floor, and your suicide note."
And ends up having to call for help to save her life.
The only thing that he ever wanted from his mother was for her to love him. But she wasn't capable of being a true mother to her own son. She kind of became the demon, and she passed that on to her son.
So as we were looking into it, it was hard to understand why he was sending money back to his mother.
I think that she had so much control over him that he was just powerless.
Marco was fired from his job. He was going to lose his license, no doubt lose his house. He had been entertained the thought of moving to Australia.
He was going to go to jail, possibly, or have to pay back millions of dollars.
And at this point, John reached out with an olive branch to his mother, asking her for help. It was a very humbling situation for him, because here he had always been in that role of trying to impress his mother, and now he had to reach out in a very, very embarrassing situation and ask for help.
Markle is groveling with his mother, begging, pleading, almost on his hands and knees to get money, to get out of this trouble.
She essentially told him that you made your bed, you're gonna have to sleep in it. And I think for John, this was the ultimate betrayal from a mother who he had always hoped would help him out.
Mercedes McCambridge was a malignant narcissist. The one time that he really needed her, she just wasn't there for him. That's when his anger turned to something much darker, much more sinister.
But we still didn't know about how his death had come about.
You know, there was no way that one individual could have shot himself simultaneously with both handguns.
It's all just makes it that much more strange.
Your father had introduced Elavil into their bloodstream.
That night, John also rented Nightmare on Elm Street for the whole family to watch.
The movie Nightmare on Elm Street is about a man who killed people who were sleeping.
So after the family watched the movie and the kids were in bed, his wife went to bed, and John waited until they were in a deep sleep from the medication, and after he was assured of that is when he began.
And then he put his mask on and went to his children's bedroom. This is the actual mask that John Markle wore when he killed his entire family. He couldn't bear for them to see his face, to know that he was the person behind the mask pulling the trigger and taking their lives.
The thunder, the lightning would probably cover up the sounds of the gunshots and any screams that may have happened.
Christine might have been startled awake and sat up because maybe she heard the gunfire in her daughter's room.
You know, what is it that Christine experienced that night? Did she see him with the mask on?
How horrific it would have been to be asleep in your bed and someone shows up with 2 guns and a mask on. After he went back downstairs to his study and he started writing these letters.
He called the attorney to the house.
There was gunshot residue on John's hands. They were in contact with a weapon. The fact that he was able to shoot himself twice with, at the same time with 2 different guns, so I guess it's all just makes it that much more strange.
I believe that I may have been across the street when the shootings occurred. I was there for an hour or longer with that storm. Did I hear the final gunshots? Did he see me pull up? I don't know.
The big question was why he struck out against his own family instead of striking out at the person he was really angry at, which was his mother. And in my mind, I think that she had so much control and power over him, he couldn't strike out against that monster. So John Markle slaughtered her entire family.